In a quiet little town just outside of London where nothing much ever happened except for the occasional missing cat or a slightly burnt scone at the local tea shop, something very peculiar was about to unfold. Albert Piffle was not your usual superhero material. He was neither tall nor particularly strong, and his most outstanding achievement to date had been winning second place in the annual village marmalade making competition, and that was only because Mrs. Wiggins had been caught cheating with shop-bought oranges. But one morning, as Albert prepared his breakfast, he made a discovery that would change his life forever. He opened a jar of his latest batch of marmalade, spread it thickly on a piece of toast and took a bite. Suddenly, whoosh! He felt a most extraordinary sensation. His arms tingled, his feet wobbled, and before he could say Paddington's knickers, he shot straight up into the air, knocking over his tea in the process. When he finally landed, somewhat ungracefully in his back garden, he realised something astonishing. The marmalade had given him superpowers. He could leap over rooftops in a single bound, run faster than a disgruntled postman, and most impressively, shoot globs of sticky, citrusy goo from his fingertips that could trap even the most mischievous of villains. Thus, Marmalade Man was born. News of his marmalade-fueled heroics spread rapidly. The town had never had a superhero before, and Albert took his duties very seriously. He saved Mrs. Plimpton's cat from a tree, even though the cat was rather ungrateful about it, helped old Mr. Dobbins cross the road, even though Mr. Dobbins hadn't actually wanted to cross, and foiled a gang of biscuit thieves who had been plaguing the local bakery. But every superhero needs an arch nemesis, and Marmalade Man was no exception. Enter the Crumpet, a sinister figure with a craggy face and a heart as dry as overcooked toast. The Crumpet had one goal: to rid the world of all spreads and make dry, dull breakfasts the law of the land. Their first encounter was at Mrs. Butterworth's cafe, where the Crumpet had replaced every jam jar with stale digestive biscuits. It was a scene of utter devastation. Pensioners wept into their empty teacups. Children sobbed at the sight of their dry, unbuttered toast. The horror! Marmalade Man sprang into action. "Not on my watch, Crumpet!" he cried, flinging a glob of extra chunky Seville right at his enemy. But the Crumpet was prepared. He ducked, leapt onto the counter and retaliated with a handful of flour, aiming straight for Albert's eyes. "You'll never defeat me, Piffle. A world without spreads is inevitable." Albert staggered back, wiping his eyes just in time to see the Crumpet making a run for it. He knew he had to act fast. With one swift motion, he reached into his pocket and pulled out his secret weapon, the golden jar, a batch of marmalade so potent, so spectacularly sticky, that it had been banned from the village fair for being too delicious. He flung the contents at the Crumpet, who was immediately engulfed in a thick, citrus-scented trap. "No!" the villain wailed, thrashing as he became glued to the cafe floor. The townsfolk erupted into cheers, hoisting Marmalade Man onto their shoulders. "You've saved breakfast, Mr. Piffle," cried Mrs. Butterworth, tears of joy streaming down her flour-covered cheeks. Albert smiled. He knew his work wasn't done. As long as there were dry, unbuttered toasts, unsalted scones and spreadless crumpets, Marmalade Man would be there, watching, waiting, and always ready, with a spoon in hand.